He got this one wrong. That's what Arizona Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton said about President Joe Biden's pardoning of his son Hunter for the younger Biden's federal gun and tax, convictions. And Stanton wasn't the only Democrat criticizing, Biden's very broad but legal use of his pardoning powers. Some called it selfish. I call it kind of more like, codependent behavior from an addict's parent. Headline number 2, we're a month beyond the general election, and a new Noble Predictive Insights survey of nearly 1,000 Arizona voters shows that a majority felt that President-elect Trump had better policy ideas than Vice President Harris, including independents who broke for Trump 9 points on this question. I just wish people would only talk with pollsters about this stuff, or at least the people I had Thanksgiving dinner with, if they would only have talked to pollsters about the past election. And headline number 3, newly elected Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari apparently thinks things like doing her job and, taking votes on leadership and that kind of important stuff, I guess, is more important than showing up here on the AZ Political Podcast. Actually, no. Her aides very nicely asked me yesterday if they could actually reschedule for a couple of weeks in the future. And I'm actually very excited to talk to her. So I said yes. And that is why I am introducing you to someone who is obviously not Yasmin Ansari.
That's true.
Yeah, it's very true. Instead, joining me on the AZ Political Podcast is Sean Noble, introducing you to someone who is very obviously not Yasmin Ansari, right?
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to double check. I might ask for ID later. Instead, joining me on the AZ Political Podcast is a guy who I crossed paths with when I was working in politics, political strategist Sean Noble, who's the founding partner of the political consultancy DC London. Sean also served as chief of staff for former Arizona Congressman John Shadegg.
I did.
Yeah, and notice, Sean, I said crossed paths with, not crossed swords
That's
with, right?
We were always on the same side.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that survey from Noble Predictive. No relation, by the way.
That's right.
Yeah. In fact, the first time I met Mike Noble of the pollster, he said, not Sean Noble's brother. And he meant it so that people wouldn't confuse you with him. Like it was in a nice way. It shows that immigration and the economy were the driving issues in this election. Is it just me, or does that sound a little more like the Arizona of old?
That's kind of like a duh.
Right.
I mean, there were so many, and I think this is where the Democrats, I think, misunderstood what was going on with the electorate. Clearly, economy and immigration were the driving forces. They kept trying to say, oh, no, it's abortion. Abortion's going to save the day. And what I don't think they realized was that the abortion issue really was the 2022 issue. That's when the Dobbs decision came down.
Right.
Republicans underperformed in the 2022 elections. And so, kind of the lance was the boil was Lance. Yeah. Yeah, the boil was Lance. And especially here in Arizona, because the abortion issue was on the ballot, that gave a lot of suburban women who care about immigration, care about border security, care about the economy, care about crime, but they might care about abortion as like their number 2 or 3 issue. They're like, oh, I'm going to vote for this initiative. And that gave them permission to vote Republican on all the other issues they care about.
Yeah.
So it actually, weirdly, the Democrats' miscalculation was that by putting the abortion initiative on the ballot, they actually made it easier for Republicans to win the legislature and the congressional seats. And, what you saw was Schweikert and Siscomani, who were both supposedly going to go down, prevailed. And the legislature actually is more Republican than it was before.
Right.
So
yeah, we were talking about what a narrow majority it was before and how it could actually be split, possibly, or maybe even swing to the Democrats. And this does kind of feel like a little bit of the Arizona of old.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely feels like more like the Arizona of old. That's going to make it very interesting to look into the 2026 cycle.
Yeah.
The party, the Republican Party, is a different look than it was of old, obviously, with Trump at the top. It's more of a populist party. But the issues that are animating people are pretty traditional issues, really.
Yeah.
It's not anything that's kind of out of left field. So, typically the first midterm election of a newly elected president, in this case, Trump, are very bad for the president. But given the drubbing that the Democrats took across the nation and the realignment with the voters, it's going to look like a different kind of midterm, I think. I think the Democrats should be very, very concerned.
So you don't think we'll have a flipping of what happened in the mid-'90s, when the Republican Revolution happened under a Democratic president like Clinton, and what happens very often with first term, and actually you can't say he's a first termer,
right.
With Trump, but what happens in the middle of a term very often is that the party that's out of power ends up taking control of Congress.
And that's happened in recent years. It's been almost a every 2-year change.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a flip-flopping back and forth.
But you don't think that might happen?
I don't think it's I think I would say that the US House probably has some risk because it's such a narrow majority.
Yeah.
The Senate, I think the gains that the Republicans made in the US Senate are enough to weather whatever storm might happen in 2026, because there are just no competitive races really coming up in 2026 in the Senate. I mean, there's a couple that might be competitive. When you look at Maine, with Susan Collins is up, and North Carolina, Tom Tillis is up. But even if they were to go down, that would still be 51 Republicans in the Senate. House, different story. Here in Arizona, the state legislature, I feel like it's pretty solidified. If anything, there's, if there's good candidate recruitment in a couple other districts, they could actually hold or grow the Republican majority in 2026.
And I found it interesting, over the last few years, I've heard a lot of people say, they're going to turn Arizona blue, we're going to flip it blue and all. I think a lot of people missed around the country is that Arizonans are willing to vote for Democrats. Once again, we have 2 Democrats representing us in the U.S. Senate for, it happened, of course, before Kyrsten Sinema switched to an independent, but it was the first time since the Truman administration, right? But you have to be a certain type of Democrat, right?
Yes. And that will be an interesting test for Gallego because he has been pretty hard left. He was a member of the Progressive Caucus when he was in the House, and he definitely campaigned more to the center. I thought he ran a brilliant campaign.
I
brilliant
wholeheartedly agree. That was amazing.
And so it'll be interesting to watch how he actually comports himself once he gets to the Senate. Is he going to take more of a Kyrsten Sinema approach or even a Mark Kelly approach? Mark Kelly's not quite as independent as Sinema, but he's been his own guy. He hasn't been a rubber stamp. And so I think the one thing that Gallego has going for him is that the Democrats are in the minority. And so his votes are not as consequential.
Yeah.
So, I think he'll probably do a pretty good job. And the question is, if he wants to stay as a senator when he comes up for re-election in 6 years, he needs to not be a progressive.
Does he do that thing that I've heard many people being accused of, and that is whether they're Republican or Democrat, they're true to their party the first couple of years. They kind of go pretty moderate, maybe by year 3 or 4, and then they swing back to their party, or, as the case may be in Arizona, they have to stay more in that independent range because of, our independent voters here.
Well, as Barry Goldwater used to say, I'm an honest man in an election year.
I loved that guy. He was so funny.
So I don't know. We'll see. I tend to think that he's going to be less progressive in the Senate than he was in the House, and that he will recognize pretty early on, if he hasn't already, that just putting Arizona first is, Mark Kelly's done a pretty good job of doing that. So I think that, that's a pretty good model for them to, because this is not a blue state. It's basically not even purple, really.
Yeah.
And, you had the anomaly of 2022 when you had really terrible candidates on the Republican side. We lost governor, we lost Secretary of State, we lost AG. So that was the first time in a long time that you had that many constitutional offices go Democrat over Republican. And then in this last election, you saw the one bad candidate in the Senate lost, but all the other Republicans
You can say her
won.
name.
Yeah,
Say
Carrie
her
Lake.
name.
She was a terrible candidate. I mean, it's obvious.
Yeah.
So going into 2026, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the Republicans do as far as who they nominate for different offices. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Democrats, because you have Adrian Fontes, the Secretary of State, who is going to become less important now that we have a lieutenant governor. We're going to, this will be the first, 2026 will be the first time we have a lieutenant governor. And Chris Mays, who has ambition, they're both chattering about the potential of primarying Governor Hobbs.
Yeah.
That would be
And neither one of them are fans of Katie Hobbs.
No, that's clear. I mean, all you have to do is look at the body language when they're all in the same room.
Right? Yeah. So do you think, and just purely in a political science way of looking at it, not as a Republican, but do you think Bejarano deserves another shot as head of the Democratic Party in Arizona?
I think that she probably does, because there is a challenge. Parties need to have some continuity and some stability. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a rough year for Democrats. She cannot be the person that's blamed on.
Right.
I mean, first and foremost, you have to put that blame on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. What happens at the top rolls downhill.
Yeah.
And there was there were a lot of outside groups that were supporting Democrats that were miscalculating what the messaging should be. So I wouldn't put that on the Democratic Party. And so I think
the state Democratic Party.
Yeah. So I think that she probably deserves a second term. Now, I know nothing about what's going on in the Democrat Party establishment and machinations, but again, we'll face the same thing with the Republicans about whether I don't know whether Gina Swoboda is going to run again or not, and who the party chairman might be. But continuity. I mean, you see how fractured the Republican Party got when Carrie Lake leaked the tape of Jeff DeWitt, who was there on Trump's behalf, asking her not to run, and she turned it into some great conspiracy. And then the person she had lined up to be this party chairman got undercut by the Trump people who said, no, it's going to be Gina.
Yeah.
And so she had to immediately switch. And, it was a mess for Carrie Lake. She has been one of the worst candidates in the history of Arizona politics.
Have you ever been an officer in the state party?
I've been a state committeeman.
Okay.
And I've been a precinct committeeman for years, but state committeeman was the highest.
Is that a job you'd never want?
Never. There is nothing that is more thankless or career impacting in a negative way than being a state party chairman of either the Republican or the Democrat. I mean, I can't think of anyone who went from party chairman to anything that was a step up.
Yeah.
In the realm of politics. Now, we had party chairmen who were very successful post-chairman in whatever they were doing. But if anyone runs for party chairman thinking, oh, this is a stepping stone to elective office, you're sorely, sorely mistaken.
Let's talk a second about what was really the big political news this week. It happened on Sunday night, and it was all we talked about. It would seem like on Monday's Arizona's Morning News, and that is Joe Biden pardoning his son Hunter very broadly, in a more broad way than just about any other president has ever done, used those pardoning powers, except maybe possibly with Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. But he wasn't pardoning his son. He was pardoning Richard Nixon, to help the country move on. How do you think this hurts Joe Biden's legacy, and maybe he doesn't even care about his legacy at this point? And do you think that Democrats like Greg Stanton had any other choice but to criticize this?
Well, I think that I was happy to see that Stanton criticized the decision. That tells me that Greg has, some independence, and he recognizes that this is just absurd. I mean, if it's one thing to pardon your son, if it's a narrow pardon going specifically at the things that he was, convicted of, and because he was going up for sentencing, that's why the timing of this was earlier than what people might have expected for a late pardon. He was supposed to be sentenced in the next week or so, but this was basically anything,
right,
for almost 11 years, and you're right. This is the broadest pardon in the history of the United States outside of, and it might even be more broad than Richard Nixon's pardon.
Yeah, I think it is.
I mean,
yeah.
You really have to look at that. I am of the opinion that this. I mean, I tweeted at the time. It turns out that Joe Biden's been on Team Trump all along, because this gives Trump a complete open door to do whatever he wants on the pardon stuff. There's no way that there's any pardon that Trump could do that's going to be worse than this one.
Unless it's a blanket pardoning of everybody involved in January 6th, maybe.
Well, even that, you're talking about a specific one crime, one day. And even though even if he pardons all of the people, and I don't know how many, it's 1,000 or something like that. I mean, those crimes, other than the ones that, I don't know that it'll pardon the ones that were the truly violent people that were like beating cops.
Yeah.
They don't deserve to be pardoned. As far as the others that were there, I mean, I think it was a horrific thing for Americans to do, to storm the Capitol the way they did. I do think some people probably got caught up in the moment. Mm-hmm. Not an excuse. But I expect that he'll pardon some of those people for sure. But again, most of those pardons will be for misdemeanors that are basically trespassing.
Do you think he should pardon Jacob Chansley for wearing buffalo horns?
No.
Wow.
That was egregious.
I was like, there's the Arizonan who's there? Really?
Yeah,
okay,
right,
that's
exactly.
just not good. Let me throw this idea out at you. You said, it appears Biden's on Team Trump with, using his pardon powers. Does he possibly make everybody happy now by pardoning Trump before he leaves office?
He
doesn't have to.
No, he doesn't. But I think that
Trump could pardon himself. But
I do believe that you asked about the legacy. I think if he were to pardon Trump, that would do something to help his legacy.
Right.
Now, clearly, the Democrats would go crazy.
Right.
But what are they going to say after he's pardoned Hunter? I mean, it's just like, so a lot of, they're actually, what I've heard internally among Democrat operatives and office holders is they wish that Biden would have done Trump and Hunter together.
Oh, yeah.
That would have made it less bad.
See, now you're thinking like a political strategist. Yeah, that's a good move.
But, he still may. One of the things that's that's just coming out right now is that every president wants to have their presidential library. Mm-hmm. You've got to go out and raise money for that. It's not a cheap thing.
Right.
Biden doesn't have independent wealth.
Right.
Despite how much money China and
despite that Corvette.
Right. And the Biden pardoning Hunter has turned off a number of big donors, saying, "We're done. This is outrageous. This is the last straw. We're not helping at all anymore. His legacy is too tarnished. Not going to do it."
And what a wide swing for a guy. I was actually at the Democratic National Convention covering it, who was mentioned in the same breath by many people as George Washington, because George Washington stepped aside for the good of the country, and Joe Biden was stepping aside for the good of the country, to now swing all the way over to, he's not even qualified in some Democrats' minds to be Washington's dentist with the wood teeth and everything.
Yeah, what is fascinating. So this is a pretty good case study in the whole circus that is politics.
Yeah.
In the sense that he couldn't have been more revered at the convention because he saved them by getting out of the way, because he was going down to defeat for sure. And they just had so much, they were so thankful. I mean, the convention was really just a huge sigh of relief for Democrats.
Yeah, it was.
And so they heap all this praise, which, you know, as you point out, now they're like, oh, he should have gotten out earlier. Why didn't he even run in the first place? Or, you know, it's like, you people are so callous. I mean, this is just, it's absurd. It literally is a circus.
It's not endemic to just Democrats, though.
No, we do the same thing.
It's chattering political class,
yes,
in general.
It is. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder why in the world I'm involved.
So we talked about the possibility of Adrian Fontes or Chris Mays, you know, trying to run for governor as Democrat. Who runs from the Republican side? I mean, that campaign, let's be honest, has already started in some people's heads. You know, 2026 governor in Arizona.
Well, I think that, I mean, clearly the ones that are being, you know, Karen Taylor Robeson clearly is looking at it. You know, I've heard that Jason Beck, the mayor of Peoria, is looking at it. I'm assuming that there are probably some legislators who are looking at it. I mean, I'll just point out, I don't know the last time we had a legislator, other than, you know, on the Republican side, become governor.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And I'm forgetting others, but there's, you know, it is a long list that will be winnowed down pretty significantly in a short amount of time, is my guess. They're going to have to move fairly quickly.
Does Kimberly Yee run again, do you think?
I think she probably, I mean, given that she's term limited as state treasurer, I think that she probably looks at it and says, why not give it a shot?
And the fact that she just didn't do well was the fact that Carrie Lake was taking the oxygen out of every
I
single
think
room.
Carrie Lake definitely took a lot of oxygen out of the room. And you had people like Matt Salmon and Karen Taylor Robeson that were already in. I think Kimberly, you know, in 2022, she was the top vote getter in the state.
Yeah.
You know, she got 56% of the vote.
Yeah.
You know, so she was the model Republican versus the crazy Republican that Carrie Lake was. So that, you know, when people say, well, how is that possible? I mean, I thought Arizona was more Republican then. Well, traditional Republican, you know, not crazy, election denying Republicans, you know, perform in the mid 50s like she did. So, and, you know, I think the one thing that I'm happy about is, well, I mean, I'm happy about a lot of things. Life is great, but
because you're a Republican,
right? But I'm happy that a Trump win has put to bed any real election denialism. I mean, there's still a few people out there. How could Lake have lost? I mean, they try to make up these conspiracies like, oh, well, they let Trump go through because they were targeting. Like, no, they weren't. If they wanted to steal the election, they would have stolen it from the guy who was not fit for office, right?
Yeah.
And if you were stealing it from, if you were stealing it at all, I mean, it's absurd. She lost by 80-some thousand votes. If that was really a steal, how in the world did you not steal the legislature? You didn't take it away from Schweikert or Ciscomani, who were both very close comparatively. So, you know, all this, I think the election denialism is now in the rearview mirror. And there's going to be a small cohort of Republican voters who still think that there's things to do. But Justin Heap was elected as the county recorder in Maricopa County, and so now it's on him. And now it's on him to. He's
definitely sounding more moderate.
Yeah,
I'd say. You know?
Well, I'm telling you, once he gets into that job, he's going to realize that it's not as simple as same day voting, paper ballots, blah blah blah, all the stupid things that people say about.
We've always had paper ballots.
We've always had paper ballots, and we haven't had same day voting one-day voting for 30-some years.
Yeah.
So,
wow. It's going to be an interesting 2 years. It always is in Arizona. As Adrian Fontes says, we put the AZ in crazy, right? And I always go back to this. If Arizona's playing a part in doing away with the idea of election denialism and, rigged elections, I can just point to the Arizona Diamondbacks. If there was any time that baseball would have been fixed, it would have been 2001. The Yankees should have won the World Series after 9/11, right? Instead, the Diamondbacks won. So
right.
we're out front disproving conspiracy theories.
That's right.
From day one.
Day one.
All right. Hey, Sean, a pleasure. It's been too long since we've seen each other, and to see each other on camera, that's extra special. Appreciate your time.
Extra special. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you for watching the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. We'll see you real soon.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.